Hi there. This is just going to be a quick little tutorial about how to do a rendezvous and docking maneuver, but to specifically do this in a situation where we have as much daylight as possible to do. I've noticed a lot of videos recently from other players where they have been having problems with always ending up on the night side of the planet when they're completing their docking maneuvers, which of course is very difficult to do when you can't see what you're doing. So there's actually a fairly straightforward method for doing docking that will put you in the daylight and allow you to choose where that docking is going to occur with some accuracy. Now, there are a lot of methods out there for doing a rendezvous, and this is just one of them. But this one will allow you to do a rendezvous mostly in the location of your choosing, and will be fairly fuel efficient as well. So what I've created here is a sample situation in which our ship is orbiting at about half the altitude of our target ship. Now, this is simulating a situation where you have probably launched from the surface of the planet and intend to dock with another spacecraft. And this is frequently the situation you'll be in if you're doing an Apollo-style mission to another planet or one of the moons. You'll probably be in a situation where you've come up from the surface and you've wanted to get yourself into a stable orbit, but you're coming up from below your target. So we're going to work from that direction here. The principles will work in the other direction, but you'll just have to reverse the direction of what you're doing. So here the goal is we want to be able to dock with the ship and have the maximum amount of daylight to work with. So we want to start our rendezvous back over on this side. But we'll get to that in a moment. The first step that we need to take into account is, if I switch to the side here, you can see that the planes of our orbits are inclined. This happens a lot with any sort of manual launch. You probably will not be real precise in how you've launched from the surface, or the other spacecraft may have come in from another trajectory, from a lunar return or something along those lines. So that's something we have to deal with. This is a minor inclination change, but the thing that we have to remember is that when you are in the last moments of docking with the other spacecraft, when you're approaching it and you're about to make contact, you are going to be in an almost identical orbit. So we need to do everything we can to make our orbit as similar as possible by the time we get there, and to save fuel along the way if we can. So with that in mind, the first thing we're going to do is adjust our inclination. And to do that, we're going to set our target. And as you can see, we have about a 3-degree differential at both the ascending and descending node. And so we're going to just go with the nearest one. We're going to start with the descending node. I'm going to add a maneuver here, and there it is. We're going to try to center it as carefully as we can on the actual descending node. I just want to be as precise as I can without going into too much trouble to be ultra precise. Now for this, because it is a descending node, we need to thrust upward. And I can start to do that, and you can see it's at minus 1.4. Go a little further, we're at minus 0.7. And a good rule of thumb here is you'll see that this is just starting to drift out from under my maneuver. And as soon as we start to see it escape, and we see that going about half, and you have to be very careful with the controls here because that will spin around very quickly. But as soon as you see them disappear off to the sides like this, that's when you've gotten those nodes down to about 0 degrees. And that's exactly where we want it to be. So now, before executing any maneuver, it's usually a good rule of thumb to rotate the spacecraft first. This gets you all lined up with your maneuver, and of course you may have to hunt for it if it's in a direction you're not already aligned to. But if you get aligned to the maneuver first, then you don't have to worry about the timing as you approach it. Now here I'm lined up reasonably well. Now this burn, we don't know exactly how long it's going to be because of the fact that we haven't fired our engines since the last time the game was reloaded. So it's showing not applicable or unknown here for the estimated burn time, but I know from experience that this is probably going to be about 5 seconds of burn time because it's only 100 meters per second, and we're doing this with a skipper engine on a fairly small spacecraft. So I'm going to accelerate time and get really close to it, and I'm going to wait until I'm just a few seconds shy of the actual maneuver. At 5 times acceleration, we'll reach it very quickly now. Now, 3 seconds away, I will start my burn. And I'm not even going to go at full throttle, because this is not a very long burn, and I want to be able to end it fairly precisely. So here we are reaching just about 0, and poof, we're done. In fact, I overshot slightly, but it's close enough. The ascending node still shows a 0, and in fact, a little trick that you can use here is, since I have RCS enabled, I can use the N key to reverse thrust and undo a little bit of my overshooting. And there we are. These nodes are at 0, where I want them to be, and our orbit is perfectly inclined to our target. So now, we'll go on to the next step, and this is the important part about choosing where we're going to intercept this other spacecraft. We want to make sure we have the maximum amount of daylight. I'm going to focus on Kerbal for a moment here so I can rotate around the planet itself. Now, in order to maximize our daylight time, we need to be doing our docking while we're in this portion of the orbit, since we're going counterclockwise. And you can see that the planet is significantly smaller than the orbit. There's an area of space right back in here where the sunlight will still reach our orbit back into here. So this is about where we want to start our interception and make sure our spacecraft are illuminated. So I will want this side to be the target of our intercept. So now, as with all orbital mechanics, anytime you're changing your apoapsis or your periapsis, you're going to do so from the opposite side of the orbit. Now, as you can see, the apoapsis and the periapsis are not aligned with the direction of where I'm going to make this maneuver. However, that's okay, because this is a mostly circularized orbit anyway, but even if it weren't, you can create a new periapsis or apoapsis from your current position just by thrusting in the appropriate prograde or retrograde direction. So in this case, because we want our interception to be here, we're going to thrust on the opposite side. The same number of degrees prior to the morning terminator is the same number of degrees prior to the evening terminator is where we're actually going to create the maneuver. Now, remember, we want to make our orbit as similar to the target as possible. And we also need to make sure that our orbits intersect at the chosen location. So we're going to burn prograde with this maneuver until the orbits just touch each other right in that location. And we want to get that as close as we can. It doesn't have to be ultra precise, but we want it to be pretty close. And you can see that the orbital markers here are starting to show up for estimated intersection locations, but they're not going to be very precise right now, and that's okay. So from this location, we're going to go ahead and do our burn. And again, as with any burn, we need to make sure that we align first. And there is our maneuver marker right there. And we are now aligned. And this burn is also going to be about 5 seconds long, just like the last one. It's only 135 meters per second, roughly. And so we will start our time warp, and we will thrust around to that location. And I overshot, but that is okay. We'll manage. What this will do is just shift our location of intersection just a little bit more into the morning than where I had originally intended, but that is okay for purposes of this demonstration. So this is close enough. I'm going to end the maneuver, and as you can see, if we look really, really closely here, the orbits touch, and in fact, actually, there's still a tiny little bit of gap here, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on the engine a little bit longer, and there we are. They overlap very nicely. So now we have our chosen interception location here. This is going to be the area that we start our rendezvous. So we're going to have to create a maneuver here to try to synchronize our orbits. And we will start by adding a maneuver node, and we're going to do it very close to what this interception marker is showing here, this intersect estimate. Now, in previous versions of the game, we would normally have to go around the orbits several times until the target ship was just a little ahead of us. Since we have the smaller orbit, we will catch up with them in one further orbit if they're just a little ahead of us. So, but starting with version 0.23.5, they give us another option. We can use the maneuver nodes, and we can right-click on it, and it gives us these plus or minus indicators that allow us to add or remove additional orbits to the time in which the maneuver is scheduled. Right-click on it again to get our handles back. Now, I accidentally brought up the apoapsis number here, which I'm going to just get rid of, and I will slide this back to where it was. And of course we now have the Kerbal periapsis number showing. There we go. So what we will need to do is probably future date this by at least one orbit. If we do that, as you can see, we almost get close enough to intercept our target here, but if we wanted to close this gap together, unfortunately what we would have to do is speed up our orbital period by burning retrograde and bringing our periapsis down inside the planet. We simply can't do that for making sure that we have this intercept on the next orbit. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to want to future date this even further. Either that, or we can make the option of using a little bit of extra fuel by going overshooting the target's orbital size here. As you can see, if I come up and match it, we almost get an interception over here. It's a little further away from where we were intending, but we can go with that if we really want to. Let's see how close that I'll actually get together. And you see, if I were to try to use this this intercept right here, it's still not coming together very well, and it's also getting very far through the day side. We wouldn't have a whole lot of daylight left if we wanted to use that maneuver. So actually what we're going to do, I'm going to bring this the length of the burn back down quite a bit so that I can see estimates of what future orbits are going to look like. Now if I press this multiple times, you'll see that the target's position at our next intercept is going to be in wildly different positions. We need to bring this back around close to where we were. Now if it's ahead of us like this, then that results in a situation where we would have to shrink the size of our orbit to make that work. If, however, it's behind us, we can make our orbit larger to slow ourselves down in terms of our orbital period to make an interception possible. So what I'm going to do is actually increase the size of my orbit, and as we watch this happen, you'll see what happens here. I can slide this back and forth to fine-tune it, but we actually have an intercept right there, and we only had to go outside of the target orbit a tiny, tiny bit. Yes, it is possible to do this without overshooting the target's orbit to save fuel, but you might have to go around in the orbits several more times, and I'm going to keep this very short for this demonstration. So here we have an interception that is at only 3.7 kilometers, which is pretty good. You can fine-tune that a little further if you want, but it's really not that big of a deal as long as we get very close. And in fact, here we are, 0.5 kilometers. How nice is that? So now that we have our maneuver, we're going to, as usual, try to line up with the maneuver first. And this is going to be a prograde burn when we get there. Now, it's prograde relative to that side of the orbit. We're currently up here. So this is going to be in a different direction than what you're immediately expecting on the nav ball. In this case, it's straight down relative to the planet. So we're actually looking at what looks like straight down, a downward trajectory. So there we are, we're lined up. Now our burn is only 168 meters per second in this case. Once again, because I had to quick load and do some adjustments and test how this maneuver was going to work, this is not showing how long the burn is going to be, but we know from the previous burns that it's not going to be much longer. This is only going to be maybe 5 or 6 seconds. However, it's a day into the future. This is a full Kerbal day, which is 6 hours. So we're going to go ahead and start our time warp, and we will go around the orbit several times. We're still at a day. Now we're coming down to 4 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, less than an hour. Now it is possible to do this this sort of burn, like I said, to do it in possibly only 2 or 3 orbits. You may not have to waste an entire day matching up with your target. Unfortunately, just in this example, that it has worked out this way, but here we are coming down to a few minutes left till our burn. 3, 2, 1, and now we're down to about 30 seconds, 10 seconds. That's probably pretty good. We know this is only going to be about a 5-second burn, so I'm going to wait until this says about 2, 3. Here we go. And then I will slow down very gradually as this comes to the end of the maneuver. And that's good enough. Now, as you can see, of course, as is usually the case, it's not going to execute absolutely perfectly. So now our intersection is showing at about 9.7 kilometers. I probably overshot a little bit, so we'll use our earlier trick of using the forward and back buttons for the RCS. And you can see if I push the N key to reverse the thrust a little bit, this is actually going down. It started at 9 kilometers, now we're down to about 3. 1.0, there's 0.6. That's actually pretty good. So we're going to go with that. In fact, I'll do a quick save real quick, just in case. So now, this is the relatively easy part of the rendezvous at this point. All we have to do is complete this one last orbit, and we will be right next to our target. And then it's just a matter of matching velocities. I will go ahead and show this part very quickly, even though the original intent of this tutorial is just the rendezvous itself, and to do so on the morning side of the planet so that we have plenty of daylight. But we're going to go ahead and complete this so you can see that what the whole process looks like. And as you can see, we very nicely come together. Both of these intersections, actually the first intersection is showing at 0.6. It's still 2 minutes away. My relative target velocity is only 41 meters per second. We know that we can complete that in probably less than a 2-second burn. So what we're going to need to do is, again, as usual, we want to make sure we line up with the direction of our burn first. Now in this case, we have the nav ball in target mode, so we want to lose all of our relative velocity relative to the target. And that means aiming at the retrograde marker, which is this one over here. Remember, this is a relative velocity, and by killing our velocity relative to the target, we're actually going to be matching orbits with it. If we get in a little bit closer, you can see we're at about a minute to go, so I'm going to time warp in a little closer. And I'm going to do this entirely in the map mode right here. We're going to get down to just a few seconds remaining. There it is, -3, -2, that's good. So I'm going to just burn very gradually, and as you can see, I've arrested almost all of our velocity. In fact, I think I overshot a little bit, so I'm going to use RCS and pull our target speed. So it's stopped at about 0.5 meters per second right there. I'm going to move to the new retrograde marker, and I'm going to RCS forward with H, the H key a little bit, and once again our relative velocity drops and it's down to about 0.2, 0.1. That's very close. So now we're very close to our target, and I'll zoom back out again, and you can see our orbits are absolutely synchronized here. If I go back to our spacecraft view, you can see that the sun is passing the planet here, and we're on the morning side. So we have the entire Kerbal day side of the planet in which to complete our docking maneuver. The spacecraft is over there. As you can see, the sun is hitting the back of my ship at the moment, and I can rotate this way. Now, a trick that I like to do is rotate the spacecraft a little bit so that the up and down keys do what I expect them to do here. So I can rotate left to rotate towards the spacecraft like this, and up and down will actually take the nose up and down as I expect them to. So now in this case, as you can see on the nav ball, I am now pointed directly at the spacecraft, and I can thrust a little bit towards the spacecraft, and we will start moving towards it very rapidly. In fact, you might want to burn a little off-center to avoid crashing into it. I'm actually going quite fast now. I'm moving at 30 meters per second. So I need to get aligned with the retrograde marker again and be ready to stop. This will get us very close to the target. Full burn, and I slightly overdid it, but I can compensate for this with RCS as well. As you can see, we're right next to the spacecraft now, and we have the daylight to guide us. So now what we will do is we want to align with it. Now this is the part that a lot of people have difficulty with, is getting yourself aligned so that you actually line up with the spacecraft, nose to nose. That's a little bit tricky. I've done this a few times, so I'm used to doing this visually this way. I'll look from above, I'll look from the side, and make sure I'm more or less lined up. Now as you can see, my relative velocity is still fairly high, so I'm going to use RCS to slow down relative to the target. And I'm moving at 1 meter per second now. Now from here, all of this can be done with the nav ball. One of the things that we'll want to do is start moving with the translation controls. This is I and K will translate up and down, and the J and L buttons will translate left to right. Now as you can see, we can move the as I move this around, you can watch the retrograde marker here moving around. Now, we're going to want to move towards the spacecraft, so I'm actually going to use the H key to thrust towards it until I actually have a prograde marker in front of me. Now, something that's worth noting here is that the indicator that is showing where your target is on the nav ball here, once your ship is actually aligned in terms of its orientation, like I've done here already, then the translation keys are all you're going to need at this moment. And so this indicator for the direction towards the target, that will tend to be pushed away from the prograde marker, and so you want the prograde marker to be on the far side of that until we get closer. In fact, I can speed this up a little bit by pressing on these a little harder. And that will speed up the rate at which we move the target marker towards the center of the nav ball. As you can see, it's moving fairly rapidly now. And if you want, you can even time accelerate a little bit to make it happen faster. So there we are. It's almost in the center, so what we need to do is change our translation controls here to bring that very close to the center, and we actually overshot a little bit. So as you can see, I'm going to put this marker just a little bit below and to the right, so that we move, so that it pushes this target indicator back towards the center. And as we're getting closer, you can see that this is starting to work. In fact, I'm going to start accelerating towards the target a little bit more. We're up to about 0.5 meter per second. And this should be pretty much right on target when we get there. Getting ever so close. In fact, that marker is almost centered, so we're just going to tweak it a tiny bit on the way in. We're going to slow down with the N key just a tiny bit, get down to maybe 0.3 meters per second. And a little bit of a trick here also is to now turn off SAS. And we're very close now, and you can let the magnets do their thing. And even with that not being 100% precise, there we are. Very easy and quick docking. And that's all there is to it. And if you look at where we are on the map, we haven't even passed the morning terminator yet. You can target this docking to occur anywhere on the sunny side of the planet and have a reasonable amount of time. But if you're not comfortable with the final docking maneuver once you get close and you need some time to do it, then definitely try to arrange for your rendezvous to occur on the morning side of the planet so you have as much daylight as possible. I hope you find this useful. I know that it was very long and very verbose, but I hope that this will help you to do your dockings much more easily and much more in the sunlight in the future. Thank you, and hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.